What up? Welcome back to Quarantine, Coffee, and Jesus. We are in week 2. We're so glad that you guys are back. Everybody has been doing an incredible job. I don't have a cool background like Dan. Dan thinks he's so cool with his black bricks or 10 million plants like Juliana. But I got a really cool guest bedroom that we can do this in. So really glad you guys are back. We're going through Colossians chapter 1. We're going through chapter 1 all week. You should be reading chapter 1 each and every day. Rolling through it. But I'm going to be going through Colossians 1, 15 through 20. So just 5 verses. I only have 10 to 15 to 20 minutes to do this. From Juliana, I got 2 hours, I guess. But I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. But also at the same time, there's so much in here. So I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the five verses. And then we'll just go chunk by chunk by chunk to get through it all. So starting in Colossians 1, 15 through 20. Here we go. He is the image of the invisible God. Let's just stop before I do all this. Right now he's describing Jesus, like Jesus in his entirety. Jesus as the Lord of not only creation, but as the Lord of redemption. So like God, Jesus created everything. He redeems everything. This is who he is. So chapter 1, verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. There's a lot in there, a lot of big words, a lot of churchy words, a lot of things we need to pick apart. So we're gonna start chunking through it and work through it. So if you've been to church before, if you've heard of Jesus before, you hear oh, he's the Son of God, he's this, he's that. So when it starts off that he is the image of the invisible God, he's the embodiment of who God is. He's not only God's Son, but he's God on earth. He's both fully human and fully God, and he's the image of who God is. The firstborn of all creation. We're going to come back to the firstborn of all creation because there's another firstborn line later on in this. But the firstborn, just keep in mind, think if you're not well versed in the Old Testament, which a lot of us are not, right? Think like Game of Thrones. If you're the firstborn, you're in charge when your dad, your king, is gone. You inherit everything. You are in charge of everything. You are the one held responsible. You are the one set up to create, to build, to grow, to attack, all that type of stuff. That's you as the firstborn. So keep that imagery in mind, okay? So he's the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Let's stop there. So in the beginning, if you could dive all the way back to Genesis, when God is creating out everything, and he's in this commune with not only... Oh, hi, Bubba's. Hi, you crazy man. Booker's here to say hi. When you look at all of that, Jesus didn't come into existence when he was born, right? He's been around since the beginning of time. He was the one who created everything with God. God who made heaven, who made earth, who made, filled the earth with water and filled it with fish and filled it with animals, all that type of stuff. That was Jesus from the very beginning with him. And then that's backed up, I think I said this last week, but there's these patterns and these repetitions throughout the Bible that's shown over and over again, these repetitions of this backs up this, which backs up this, which backs up this. This is pointing you back to the very, very beginning of hey, Jesus was back there. He was in the beginning, right? He was the beginning. He's the firstborn of all of that, of all creation, right? And to think through that firstborn of all creation, leading up to the one who's before by him all things were created in heaven, on earth, visible and invisible. And then it goes to say all things were created through him and for him. And so I didn't really understand what that meant. I can understand the general term, but didn't get really to jump into what that actually meant. So Jesus comes into existence in the very beginning and creates all things. He's the one who creates all things through him, right? And then it says, but also all things were created for him. And so what does that actually mean? So not only is Jesus the one who creates everything, who is in everything, everything was created to honor and praise him. Everything that Jesus created, which it says all things, which means all things. everything that Jesus created is there to honor and glorify him and bring praise to him, which is an interesting thing to think through, especially when you get to this next part. But it's an interesting thing to think through of like all this stuff in this world that we take for granted, that we don't understand, that we don't really know. In some way, shape, or form, God reconciles that back to himself and redeems that back to himself and brings honor and glory to himself in that, which is just a really cool thought and crazy thing to picture, and just a big thing to wrap your mind around, especially in the midst of like what we're walking through right now, which comes in my next part. But like with what we're walking through right now, and it jumps to this next portion where it says, okay, back in verse 16, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So that's the end of verse 17. So he's before all things, which means he's before all things. He was created before all of it, so he's ahead of it, he's in charge of it, he's above all of it. And in him all things hold together. And doing a little bit of research in that, it literally comes down to like Jesus continually sustains everything he creates. He prevents it from falling into chaos or disintegrating, which, think of that right now. Think of our world right now and how things are crazy right now and how we're looking at it like the sky is falling, the markets are crashing, people are going crazy, people are getting sick, people are dying. Like, this is really hard stuff, really intense things. Like, look at our medical community. Like, we can't explain any of that. And in the very middle of that, in what we view as chaos, Jesus is standing in the middle of that saying, no, like, it's still in order. In him all things hold together. Jesus is holding everything together right now. So what we might see as turmoil and chaos and stuff that we can't explain and just really, really hard things to process, Jesus is standing in the middle and going, no, I got this. Like, put your faith in me. I got this. I'm holding it together. And for me, right now, that's it. A good but hard thing to think through. Like, I'm not in a spot right now of panic. I'm not in a spot right now of like huge worry. Like, I understand, like, there's a lot of things that I can't explain or understand, but there's good that's going to come out of this, and I think things are going to pick up from it. Like, I can be as optimistic as I want, but there's people that are in the middle of this. They're like, their world is ending. Like, their financial world is ending, their health world is ending, like, their legit life is ending. And in the middle of that, Jesus, like, goes, no, look here. I hold all of this together. I have got you. And if we can really grasp that, if we can hold on to that, that brings a lot of peace in the middle of darkness, which is really cool and really, really hard, but also brings a ton of, like, that's just a very small sentence to bring so much peace and strength to. So just reflect on that. Like, what does it look like for you to actually trust that Jesus is holding everything together? Everything. Not just the coronavirus stuff, but everything in your life. Jesus looks at you and goes, hey, I created it. I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to hold it together. Are you going to trust me with that? It's an interesting thought to think through, so just think through that. What are you not letting Jesus hold on to? All right, chapter 1, verse 18. And he is the head of the body, the church. Period. Pause. We'll stop there. So in Ephesians, it outlines, like, here's who Jesus is. Jesus is the groom, and his church is the bride. Jesus is a part of us. He's with us. He's our leader. He's the head of it, right? And so he is the head of the body, which is us, the church. So what does that actually mean? Think of that just in your own terms. Everything that your head does sustains the rest of you, right? As I was thinking through that thing, it's like everything that we eat, everything that we say, everything that we think, everything that we do originates here. Earlier on in the Bible, multiple times it talks about, like, don't let your heart lead you. And all of us, like, you see the thing on somebody's wall written in cursive that's like, let your heart lead, or whatever it is, you know. And the Bible says, no, don't do that. And this is the reason. Jesus is the head of the body. He's not the heart of the body. He's not any of that. He's the head. He's what controls it. He's at the top. He's the one who can see. He's the one who can assess danger. He's the one who can eat. He's the one who can listen. He's all of that for us. And he's the brain. He's what guides us and leads us and does all that. And so with everything written so far, so everything is created by God. So God is the Lord of creation. Jesus is the Lord of creation. Everything is created by him on heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he's before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he's the head of the church, head of the body. So because of all of that, because he is the Lord of all of everything, he should be the head. That just makes sense. He should be the one that's controlling us and that we're following and that we're letting lead us. So think through that. Where are you trying to be the head, right? I think I try to be all the time. I love to be in control. And in the midst of chaos, control is the best thing for me. At least I tell myself that. It's not trust or faith. But Jesus goes, no. I'm the head here. I'm the one in control. I'm the one in charge. I'm the one that sits on top and controls everything. Next sentence. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. So that firstborn from the dead, I did a ton of research on that because it's a huge concept. So you have the firstborn of all creation, okay? He's the very first of everything created. But then he's the firstborn from the dead. And so I did a ton of research, tearing through a bunch of different things. And it's just fascinating to look at. Once we hit, so verse 15 through 17, we're looking at God is the Lord of creation. He's the Lord of creating everything. Then we get to verse 18, he's the head, and then he's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. From verse 18 to verse 20, we are looking at God as the Lord of redemption, bringing everything from a place of darkness to a place of light, from a place of death to a place of life. He redeems everything. Dan wrote a song about that, like in Revelations. Jesus makes all things new, which is redeeming. He redeems it. So to think of Jesus being the firstborn from the dead, like it's the very simple, it's not simple, but if we believe who Jesus is, who he says he is, and rose from the grave, that would mean he is the first one to do that, the firstborn from the dead, right? So I was doing a bunch of research, and one thing that I found said that Jesus was the first in time, which is that first verse, right? He's the first creation, and the first in preeminence, which it says right there, that he might be preeminent, same verse. Jesus is the first to be raised from the dead. He's the founder and the initiator of this new era. So everything the New Testament is showing is like something is set aside differently from the first part of the Bible. And Jesus has ushered in this era of us being connected back to God. That because of Jesus coming and dying for us and being risen from the grave, he's ushering in a new era of connectedness back to God. Something had to die. We look at all those stories of sacrifice. Something had to die to be connected back to God. God sent Jesus. Jesus comes. He dies. He's raised back from the dead to usher in this new era of unlimited connectedness. We can be as connected as we want to be to God. And that's through Jesus' victory over sin and death. So Jesus' resurrection from death opens up the way for all who trust him to follow him in the resurrection like his when he returns. What's interesting here is this is important because it shows that our ultimate hope is not just for our own souls to go to heaven, but for our physical bodies to be raised to new life like Jesus was. He's not only the firstborn of all creation or the firstborn from death. What that means then is he's the firstborn of the resurrection. He's the first one to come back and say, hey, this is possible. Follow me. I'll take you there. Right? That's a good thing to hold on to, and that's what we have to hold on to in the midst of everything. Like that line, the firstborn of the dead, that's who Jesus is. That's who we follow. That's who we put our faith and our trust in. Because of him holding every promise of, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to tear this down. Like the temple will be torn down. I will be torn down, and I'll be raised in 3 days. And he does it. That's why we put our faith in him. So we get to verse 19. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Which means just this idea that like in the Old Testament, God fills the temple with his presence, which is like that's where you want to be. You want to be in God's presence. Jesus is the fullness of that. God dwells fully in him, right? And Jesus not only like holds God's glory and like shows it, but it's God who is in him to do it. It's not this thing that Jesus can hold. It's all of God in him, right? Which is really, really cool. So we keep going. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So to reconcile everything back. Jesus, one of the names of Jesus is he's the Prince of Peace, which comes from an Old Testament verse. And Jesus will ultimately just like take on this rebellion against God, take on this fight against God and go, I've squashed it. Like Satan can't do anything. I've taken care of it. I've flattened it. And with that, all of God's purposes can be taken and achieved, right? I'm rambling right now, but that's what it is. So not only does this mean like we now get to be connected back to God, like that's what God ultimately wanted. We get to be connected back to that. But from there, how do we push the kingdom further? How do we take steps to push that further and further? And how does Jesus use us to reconcile those things back, to take something that was lost and bring it back, to take something that was broken and fix it, to do a bunch of things to bring everything back to Jesus, to be reconciled back to him? It says that's who Jesus is and what he does and what he wanted to do, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So again, this ties back to his sacrifice and his death back on the cross, and what that entails, and what the point of that was. So in this, it's almost like poetic, these 5 verses of talking through, like, here's who Jesus is, right? He's the Lord of creation. He's the Lord of redemption, and it's all through the blood of his cross and how he makes peace by that. He doesn't keep peace by that. He makes peace by that. The cross is this central piece in everything that we believe in. Without it, none of this is real. None of this is true. None of this works. Like, without it, everything written doesn't follow through. There's a great book, I think I have it over there, The Cross of Christ. It's by John Stott. If you like to read, if you have a dictionary in your brain, read The Cross. It's a great book. It's called The Cross of Christ. It's super heady and wordy, but it's incredible, and just keeps pulling you back to, like, the focus of everything here is, like, because of the cross, all of this is possible. Because of the cross, because of Jesus' blood on that cross and the way that he made peace through that. If you read this in reverse, right? If you go from the blood of Jesus' blood on the cross, and the way that makes peace, because of that, he's able to reconcile everything back to him. He's the first one from the dead. He was raised from that. Read it backwards, and you see this unfolding of, like, everything in the Bible so far leading up to this moment of the cross. Like, the cross is the pivotal point and the changing point for everything that we believe. That's the end of my 5 verses. And as we think through those, and just as I've been reading this and reflecting on it, I've just really been thinking through, like, who Jesus is. Like, why as we read through Colossians, or last week when we read through Philippians, why do we glance over things or speed through things, or rush over who Jesus is, or I guess not we, why do I do that? I think I take it for granted a lot. I think I am like, oh, I believe in Jesus, like, I'm good to go, like, I don't need to really sit in depth in his character and go from there, but it's like, that's how we get better. And so as I've been sitting and reflecting in everything there, Jesus is the Lord of creation and the Lord of redemption, and in that looking at some questions in my life, with Jesus painted in that way, the question that I've been asking myself, and I want to ask you guys, is do you let Jesus, as he's described there, rule your life? Like, actually rule it? Like, where are you letting him actually be the head of your body? Where are you letting him actually be the lead in anywhere in your life? Or where are you trying to take that lead back? Like, no, I got it. Because I think a lot of my life, I like to control. I like to be the leader. I like to hold on to things that I don't need to hold on to, and I don't let Jesus rule it. So there's aspects of my marriage where that shows up. There's aspects of my leadership with my job that shows up. There's aspects of friendships where I don't let Jesus take the lead on it. So there's a lot. That's 3 big areas, but there's sub areas within all of that where I don't let Jesus rule it. And so one thing I've been thinking through, and one thing that I've been, like, trying to process through, is, like, how do I start letting go of that control and leaning more into the faith of that? Does that make sense? So where in your life do you actually let Jesus rule it, and where do you not let him rule it? And then my next question, my last question before we end, because I'm way over time, sorry guys. If Jesus is actually the Lord of redemption, if he is actually that, if we believe that he is actually the Lord of redeeming everything, what is one area of your life that you are controlling that you need to lay down and let Jesus take over and redeem? I think a lot of the times as I think through the areas that I control, I control them when they're in their worst moments, because I want to be the one that brings them back to good. I'm a fixer. And so I take a lot of pride in fixing things. I take a lot of pride in making things good. And so I look at what I control and what goes on in my life, and I try to do it myself instead of letting Jesus do it. But if he is the Lord of redemption, Lord means he's at the top. He's completely in control, right? What areas of my life do I need to let him redeem? Same for you. What do you need to let Jesus redeem? We love you guys. Nicole's going to take over tomorrow. But read these 5 verses again. Take a little bit of time to reflect on who Jesus is and answer those questions. Do you let Jesus rule your life completely, or what areas do you not? And then after that question, if Jesus is here to actually redeem it and is in charge of it, what's one area of your life that he can do that with? We love you guys. See ya.